Hi, everyone, and welcome to Be True, my podcast about the writing I love and the writing I do. I promise I won't rhyme the whole time, The boss returns. I'm John Tessitore, and today, afternoon at St. Joseph's for my collection, The Americans. You can find all of my work, including The Americans, at johntessitore.com. When I was a kid, maybe 11 years old, my parents poured a concrete slab in our small backyard on Long Island. A basketball court, just a little bigger than the key. Until then, I'd played what we called barefoot basketball. That's right. We had a hoop on a pole, but it was just standing there in the grass, which I proceeded to wear away as I tried to shoot. To save the grass, I wore no shoes, and my father would hose it down before I played. That's right. Just as Michael Jordan was signing his first mega-million-dollar sneaker contract, I started my basketball career on a wet grass court, barefoot. I don't know how I didn't bust a knee or an ankle. Now let me be clear. My parents really did love me. They encouraged me to play too, but until they poured the concrete, I was at risk of ending my career before it started. And this is what we now call 80s parenting. But once I had the court, I played every day. Every day. I had a red Sanyo boombox, which I'd plug into the house, and I'd turn the dial to WBAB, the local rock station, and I'd play for hours. Yes, basketball is a team sport, and yes, basketball culture is a very verbal culture. Everyone talks all the time, which is one of the reasons why it's my favorite culture. But anyone who's any good will tell you that basketball is mostly a solitary endeavor, dependent on skills you can only learn by yourself. I dribbled around folding chairs, shot over leaf rakes, I made moves against ghosts. I practiced so much that my neighbors would worry if they didn't hear the sound of the bouncing ball for a few days, and they'd call my mother and ask if I was okay. And that's really the coin of the realm. Despite all the brash talking and all the trash talking, game knows game. What good players recognize in each other is effort. Good players know that their best opponents have dribbled for miles and shot 1,000,000 baskets and have earned their respect even if they don't give it immediately. What good players see in each other, most of all, is hard work. It isn't jumping ability, because lots of stiffs can jump, and it isn't size, because lots of big guys can't play dead. It's the hours. When I was a kid, and even today, my basketball hero was Hall of Famer Chris Mullin. When my love affair started, Mullin was playing for St. John's University. He was a local kid, a Brooklyn kid going to school in Queens, and playing his home games at Madison Square Garden. And even though I grew up on Long Island, I knew people who knew his family or him, and I met him once after a Knick game, and I must have at least 5 Mullin autographs stashed away somewhere to this day. He seemed like a guy I knew, or at least I could understand, and maybe could be. Another slow, floppy socks white kid who couldn't jump. What I didn't realize is that he's 6 feet 9 inches tall. But otherwise, he didn't seem to have much more than I did in terms of physical ability. What Mullin did have, famously, was a work ethic. His commitment was legendary. Everyone in New York knew he'd been given the keys to the gym of his local parish church so that he could practice on the court whenever he wanted, night or day. And that was even before he got to college. As it happens, that gym would later be the setting of an important scene in my own life, but I'll save that story for a future podcast. But you can imagine where I'm going with this. On my little outdoor court in my little backyard on Long Island, I imagined I was doing all the same things that Mullin had done in Brooklyn. And when I was recruited to play on some CYO teams as a teen, that's Catholic Youth Organization, one of the places where old school ball was still played with enthusiasm. And even when I was recruited by a couple of Catholic high schools to play point guard, I imagined I was following in Mullin's footsteps. Now, before I get too much further, a clarification is in order. I was never going to be Chris Mullin, for a million reasons. For starters, I'm almost a foot shorter than he is. But I'm an eternal optimist, and before I stopped growing, I really believed that I would be the one to defy the odds. To have the kind of growth spurt that no one in my family has ever had. Not in the United States, not in Italy. even though both of my grandmothers were about 5 feet tall on stilts and my grandfathers were under 5 feet 8. Looking back, those coaches who recruited me should have done a simple background check, or maybe just visited us during Sunday dinner and saved us all a lot of time. But for a while, and especially during summer league season or summer camps or the CYO league, I really could play a little bit. Much more than I showed during my high school seasons, which is also a story for another podcast. But I could play because I worked hard, every day, just like Chris Mullin, in isolation, entirely self-motivated, because I love the game and I love to play it well. So this poem, Afternoon at St. Joseph's, is a scene from my youth. It's set on one of my old CYO basketball courts, but let me be clear, like this long preamble, it's not really about basketball. Small, high windows, all on one side, and what little light passed through was spectral, a smoky kind of white dazzled with dust and old incense. Rain-stained glass, tracing holy patterns on a dark wood floor, varnished to a shine, a patchwork parquet that time would rub to the grain, seams wide enough to discourage the complex gymnastics of a selfish drive, dead spots and force fundamentals. And a stage at the north end baseline, curtained, only opened when nuns spoke to student assemblies or priests said Mass on holy days, the congregation spilling from the sanctuary reluctantly, sinking into creaky folding chairs. I knew there was something righteous in the ritual, a tradition of workmen, a dignity of sweat and humble origins. The effort itself, the practice, was sacred. A dignity of sweat and humble origins. Sweat is always humble, especially in basketball. It is in the nature of basketball culture that players play everywhere, with everyone, in every condition, in every schoolyard, on every outdoor court, on every street. For example, every CYO court was different because very few of them were set up in full-time gymnasiums. Church gyms usually doubled as cafeterias for Catholic school students, or extra seating for Sunday Mass, or auxiliary chapels for holiday spillovers, or, as in my own childhood church, they were known as all-purpose rooms. More often than not, they had uneven worn floors like the gym in the poem, or even tile floors. Once or twice, I even played on indoor cement. And they had character, and you either loved the challenge of navigating theater stages and brick walls and metal posts and girders in the middle of play, or you didn't play. I love those gyms. I love the whole humble ragtag nature of those leagues. And I love to practice in those gyms when no one else was around, like in this poem. When you practiced in those gyms, you could not ignore the feeling that what you were doing was odd and haunted and special. That the work itself became special, even spiritual. And that's what I was thinking about when I wrote this poem, and what I'm trying to say in this episode. The work itself was its own reward. I haven't played basketball in almost a decade, and my basketball career, such as it was over by the time I was 19. But I don't regret a single minute I spent alone with my ball and hoop, and I actually miss that more than I miss the games. But my nostalgia is not really about basketball or sports in general, neither of which make for very interesting poems. In fact, I cut most of the basketball-y details out of the published version of this poem before I published it. No, it's not about basketball. It's about the focused, solitary commitment to learn, to improve, to find new ways of doing things, and to master old ways of doing things with humility and a sense of tradition. That's what I value here. When I watch great basketball players now, I see men and women who have spent years in a kind of blissful isolation, taking pleasure in their own sweat and strain. There's nothing superficial about their greatness. No amount of athletic ability can hide a lack of effort. But that effort can make up for a lack of athletic ability, if not a lack of height. And seeing them, current players and retired players alike, makes me wonder about others in other walks of life who may not have had that work ethic, but who believe they can do great things without learning the ins and outs of their trades, like some presidents we've had, for example. And that, I think, is the point for me. Not a Protestant work ethic or an American work ethic, neither of which has proven particularly egalitarian over time, but a basketball work ethic. That, to me, remains the standard. And so, in the hope that you find an activity you love and love to work at, and put in some time that you'll never regret, this is John Tessitore concluding another installment of Be True. If you've listened this long, thank you. You can find all of my work, including the Americans, at johntessitore.com. But first, basketball legend Bill Walton died last week, and lots of people are debating his place among the all-time greats as a player and a broadcaster. I just want to make the case for him as the most prominent white male athlete to take a public stand in favor of social justice for all. Not an easy thing to do in the 70s or 80s or even today. We know about the real greats, Jackie Robinson, Bill Russell, Arthur Ashe, Roberto Clemente, Billie Jean King, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Colin Kaepernick, Muhammad Ali most of all. In that context, Bill Walton is the first white man who comes to mind. He may be way down on the list of heroes, but he was there taking a stand, and for that alone, he should be honored as an all-time great. Special thanks to me for today's theme music, which I call E-Chord. Maybe we'll talk again, and if you enjoy this little podcast, leave some stars or a review and tell your friends. In the meantime, I gotta feed the dog. All right, Luna, I'm coming, you know?